Okay, it's time to go sailing. So let's talk about some basic terminology and some maneuvering that we'll have to do when we go sailing. Boat A is sailing along. Well, first of all, let's say, what point of sail are they on? The wind is coming pretty much straight down, perpendicular, so they're on a beam reach. The sails are over the port side, or the starboard side rather, and the wind is hitting the port side of the boat first. They're on a port tack beam reach, sailing along very nicely, except that they would like to go up here where there's a really nice restaurant and have some lunch. In order to do that, they have to start to get up that direction. So the first thing they need to do is to get up sort of in the position that boat C is in here, which means that they have to turn the boat towards the wind. And as they turn the boat towards the wind, they go from being on a beam reach to a close reach, and they have to bring their sails in and trim their sails in. And we call turning towards the wind heading up. They're heading up towards the wind. Now, they really want to get all the way over there, and if C continues in this direction, they'll never get their hamburger that they really wanted to have. In order to get over there, though, if they sail any closer to the wind, they'll be in that no-go zone where they can't sail, that 45 degrees on either side of the wind. So they actually have to turn the boat and get on the other side of the no-go zone. And so they turn the boat to get into position like boat D by going from the wind being coming across their port side through the no-go zone to the wind is on their starboard side, sailing along on a close reach with the wind coming across the starboard side. They're on a starboard tack. That maneuver, going from where boat C is to boat D, where I take the bow of the boat through the wind and I take it from being on one side of my boat to being on the other side of the boat, is called tacking. And when we get out on the water and in the boats, we'll show you the mechanical movements you need to make in order to tack, as well as what we need to do with the sails. But it is the act of taking the bow of the boat through the wind over to the other side of the wind, so the wind goes from being on one side of the boat to being on the other side. So, boat F went and had a great lunch. Now it was time for them to go home. And as they were sailing over in that direction, which is, by the way, a broad reach with the sails hanging over the port side, so the wind is hitting them on the starboard side, they're on a starboard tack. As they're sailing along, the reality is that they needed to turn the boat because they're going to run out of water pretty soon. So they turned the boat away from the wind, and as they did that, got themselves pretty much in a run. And the act of going from being at this point of sail, turning further down, we call falling off. Bearing away, turning away from the wind, falling off from the wind. The wind is still effectively coming across that corner, but they've fallen off. Boat D could do the same thing to get to the position that boat F is in. Boat D could just turn the boat down away from the wind and fall off away from the wind, and the sails are still over their port side, they're still on a starboard tack. But at this point, boat G is turned even further, and now the sails have gone from being on the port side and the wind coming across the starboard to now the sails are on the starboard side and the wind's starting to come across the port side first. They have jibed the boat. Jibing the boat, or to jibe the boat, is the act of taking the wind from one side of the boat to the other, but turning the back of the boat through the wind, not the bow of the boat. So when the stern of the boat is brought from one side of the wind to the other side, we call that a jibe. When the bow is brought from one side to the other side, we call that a tack. And we'll work through the mechanics of how we actually do the tacking and jibing once we get on the boats. Interestingly though, if we come back and look at our board, we have boat A and boat B on a collision course. And we have boat E and boat D on a collision course. So the question becomes, now what do we do? Well, first and foremost, what you always want to do is avoid a collision. And just like driving your car, it really doesn't matter who had the right of way, avoid the collision. But we do have some rules. And there are three basic rules that govern the right-of-way rules between two sailboats that we'll talk about first. And the first one is starboard over port. Now you know why we put more labels on what point of sail and what tack we're on. Starboard over port. The starboard boat has right of way over the boat that is on a port tack. So in this case, boat A is on a port tack. The wind is coming across the port side. Boat B is on a starboard tack with the wind coming across the starboard tack. So boat B has the right of way. They are what we call the stand-on vessel. They're the vessel that gets to hold their course and speed, while boat A has to give way. They have to avoid. And their choices here, they might be able to head up, turn into the wind like boat C did, and pass by boat B safely. It would probably be very difficult for them to fall off, head downwind, because that would probably increase the risk of collision. So in this case, their best option would be to head up a little bit. B's responsibility, though, is to hold their course and speed and not suddenly change their course so that A can avoid B in this case. So starboard over port is our first governing rule. The second one comes into play when we have two boats on the same tack. Both D and E are on starboard tacks. So starboard over port doesn't work. So we have leeward over windward, which introduces two more terms. Leeward is a term we use to describe something that is downwind. Windward is something that is upwind. So the windward side of my boat is this side. The leeward side of my boat is this side. This is a windward shore. This is a leeward shore. This is the windward boat. This is the leeward boat. So the rule is that the leeward boat is the stand-on boat, has right of way over the windward boat. So the windward boat is the give way boat. Part of the reason for that is that when the windward boat is upwind of the leeward boat, there's a really good chance that they're going to affect the leeward boat, the boat that is below them, ability to fill up their sails with wind, because there will be a period of time when that boat is actually blocking the wind from boat D. So boat E is the one that must maneuver, in this case, to avoid a collision. And their options in this case, they could slow the boat and let boat D sail by, or they might actually have to head up and change their tack to avoid the collision. But it is their responsibility because they are upwind to avoid the collision with boat D. Starboard over port, leeward over windward. Change the color for you. We have two boats now that are sailing in the same general direction. They're both on the same tack. And boat F is sailing faster than boat H. So boat F is about to overtake boat H, to pass them. So the rule is the overtaken boat has right of way over the overtaking boat, which is another way of saying slower has right of way over the faster boat. Because the faster boat has some choices. They don't have to go by them. They could choose to do some other things. So in this case, boat H is the stand-on vessel. They're going to hold their course and speed, provided it's safe for them and they're not driving into land someplace or another boat. Boat F then has to maneuver safely past boat H as the overtaking boat. So those are the three basic sail right-of-way rules. When we add into the mix a power boat, we have a rule that we refer to as sail over power. That sailboats have right of way over the power boats because the power boats are more maneuverable. They have greater flexibility in what they can do and how quickly they can do it than the sailboat. Our final and fifth rule involves maneuverability, and the less maneuverable boat has right of way over the more maneuverable boat. And what would I mean by that? My power boat is now towing another boat. The minute they start towing another boat, it makes them less able to maneuver as quickly. They have to take into account the boat that's being towed, and their turns have to be slower, less abrupt. They can't stop as quickly. So they become less maneuverable. So in that case, the rule in terms of who has right of way are my sailboats in this case have to give to this power boat that's towing because the sailboats are going to be more maneuverable than this particular boat. Other practical examples, if you're sailing out in Lake Michigan where we have big freighters that come into the harbor, those freighters take a long time to turn and stop. They have right of way over smaller boats, smaller sailboats, because the sailboats are simply more maneuverable. There are times inside marina areas where they describe very specific channels that the power boats have to stay in. And when we have restricted the powerboats to a smaller area, we have to give way to those powerboats, recognizing that by law and rule they've been restricted to a channel. So anytime somebody's maneuverability has been compromised because they're towing, because of their size, or because we've imposed limits on them, they become less maneuverable. And those that are more maneuverable must give way to them.